Good. Yeah. All right. Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Peah, Pei K, Halacha Aleph, and Halacha Beis. In the Dafim, God willing, we'll be learning Daf Mem Gimel. We left off on Daf Mem Gimel, Amud Aleph, all the way on the top, quickly reviewing that Rab Shimon ben Gamliel, in the case in the Mishnah, not where the Chachamim gave a knas, but where we have a doubt as to how much leket was left in this field. We don't know what's leket, what's from the Balabayas. And Rab Shimon ben Gamliel's words is that how much leket do you have to give? Kedei nefila. Give the amount that normally falls. Like we said, it's a simpler cheshbon. You don't have to look at that field or that farmer or that season. General, kedei nefila. There is a certain standard amount of leket that comes generally from each field. And how much is that? So the Gemara used the words arbas kabin lekur. And as we said, that one kur is 180 kav. So 4 kav from 180 sounds like 1/45. However, at the end of Daf Mem Beis Amud Beis, the Gemara says, let me use these words. When you have a kur, there is the output, which is a kur. Again, 180 kav, it's a quantity of grain that grew. Or arbas kabin lekur is the kur that is input. Input meaning that when you have a land, it's called the base kur. It's 75,000 amas, square amas, 75,000 square amas. In it, we always focus for some reason on barley. A kur of barley that's planted in a base kur, how much will come out? 7.5 kur. In other words, if the kur is the input, but the output is really 7.5, 4 kav from 7.5 kur, we said, is one of 337.5. It's a much smaller amount of leket, and we wanted to know which one is it. And the Gemara concluded, mamash, at the end of Daf Mem Beis Amud Beis, that Rabbi says lebeis kur. No, it's even though the words kedei nefila could mean either input or output, he said output. The output of a base kur, and there's only 4 kaf where that output is a very, very small amount. Also, by the way, it makes sense when we're imagining, we're not farmers, when we're imagining about leket, it makes sense. How much can fall out of your hand or out of the magol? A little, a mamash, a little bit. And that is the mitzvah of leaving leket for the poor. The Gemara on Daf Mem Gimel Amud Aleph will point out that in another context, we're going to have also the words kedei nefila in a complete different context. And there we will see that the interpretation of kedei nefila is not output, but it's input. And that's really posed as a question, or minimally as an observation, that the same words from a Tana, maybe depending on the context, can mean 2 different things. Or depending on the mitzias. I should think by leket, I think Rabbi Bo said arbas kabin lebeis kur because it's not more or less 2%. People don't lose that much out of their hands. So it must have been beis kur. Anyways, that will be the first tickle Gemara we're learning today. From there, we're going to move on to halacha beis on Daf Mem Gimel. Interestingly, the opening part of the Mishnah of halacha beis, according to some, is speaking about shikha, even though there's a big machlokes in the Shonim how to learn the Mishnah. We're going to follow that the opening of the Mishnah, which will explain why the opening of the Gemara for sure is about shikha. We already spoke out that there is 2 types of shikha. The shikchas kama. Shikchas kama mean that when I'm harvesting a field and I'm going systematically through my field of standing grain, cutting it all from the ground, sometimes I can simply forget some of the standing grain, very little. I go beyond it, and at some point, the Torah says, "Lo yisashuv lekachli," don't go back. I have to leave it standing. So the ani actually collects shikha from kama. Kama means from standing grain. That is something that we introduced because I think, like by most people, when we were taught as children, shikha, primarily it's shikchas oimer. Shikchas Oimer means that after the farmer, after the owner, after his workers bundled and cut oimarin, sheaves, it's called in English, right? The Chalom of Yosef Atzadik. Then, and when you cut these pekalach, you leave it on the ground. So now you have a field also systematically where every couple of feet there's another little package. You're going now with your truck and you're picking up all of the oimarim. Same idea, you forgot one or two oimarim. That's called shikchas oil. Just to remember that. So we're going to have some further definition of shikha. And also, the Mishnah is going to speak about leket. And that the leket part of the Mishnah will be behemshech to the opening of this chapter. Yes, we spoke a lot yesterday about knas. Not in the case of a knas. We have to go more. What were to happen if leket and non-leket gets mixed together? Not bo'oifen that the balabas is going to get penalized. One way could be a ruach. That means I have my field harvested. I already brought in my ears. I didn't even do the dish. I didn't even do the trampling on it yet. And then there is on the right, for God, for tzedakah, I have the one from 337 and a half. It doesn't matter the quantity. I have an ear of leket here. I have my leket over here. Let me do this for Shloimeh. And now the kasha will be, what happens if they get mixed? Now, do I have to give that ear of leket to the ani? No. I have to give him an ear. If there was one, I have to give him. But guys, don't forget that leket is exempt from Trumas Umaisis. That means when the ani gets even one ear, it's scot-free. It's tax-free money. If I'm not giving the ani that ear, if I'm substituting it with my, so I don't know which one it is, so I might end up keeping his, but I'm giving him mine. It's not fair, because then the ani will have to give Trumas Umaisis off it. So we will see. What I need to do is give him what he should have received. He was going to receive 1 ear or 2 ears. It doesn't matter the number of tax-free, meaning maisris-free ears. When I don't know which one is his, and therefore I'm going to substitute it, I have to take maisris off it and then give it to him. So what he gets is just like what he would have gotten. And that process of that substitution and me taking trumas or maisris off it is technically, halachically not so simple. If it's his and this is mine, how do I take his and give him mine? I can give him, but how do I take his? How do I make that exchange? You have to know Hilchas Kinyanim, even if he agrees theoretically. So we're going to have actually a machlokes in the Mishnah that we're not going to learn today, that we're going to leave for the later daf, God willing, next week, because the Gemara is going to speak a lot more about shikha, and exactly, the key of shikha is, the Torah says, loy sashuv l'kachto, lo tashuv l'kachto, don't go back. What's the definition? Like when I forgot, is it because I turned my back on it? We're going to see beautiful definitions. Or, as we'll see, I have more leeway. Means even if I went over it, I missed it. There is a certain point where it's not considered yet going back. That will be a big, interesting sugya that we'll have today. Without any further ado, all the way on top of the Amid. So again, the key here is that the Gemara just concluded that Rabbi Bo said that the Kedei Nefila of our Mishnah does not mean input, Abbas Kav and Likud input, which would mean Mamish, 4 Kav from 180 Kav, which would mean 1/45th. No, the Mishnah actually means output. The output of a base kud is 7.5 Kav. It makes the percentage of leket much smaller. In other words, Kedei Nefila is output. I think if I want to term it that way, you'll see the contrast. And the Gemara is going to have a problem with that, or at least an observation with that. So says the Gemara, Yudah Babo says Kedei Nefila means output. Hold on. What about a Mishnah in Bavli? The Mishnah is in Bava Metzia Daf Kufay. And this is what the Mishnah is talking about, Chem. This is such a good, what's it called, workers halacha. If people hear this, they'll relate to it. Guys, you are an artist. Let's say artist means that you don't own the land. You undertook to do all the work, and there was an agreement, whatever it was, that from the yield, you're going to get the half, a third, a fourth, doesn't matter the percent. Think about it. You're an artist, you're working hard. At some point, you realize that this year, whether it's because of the rain, didn't rain, or any other reason, there's going to be so little yield. Look at that. What would you do? words, I'm working. You speak about farming, you don't know nothing. We never know. By farming, you know that you don't know. Maybe it's not going to rain. Maybe it rained too much. Maybe there was a good wind. Maybe there was a bad wind. Your mom is in the hands of God. The emes is in every business that way. You don't know. You work. And if you're getting a percent, all of the people today that work for a percent, if they don't get a base salary, at some point, they have a right to say, I thought it's going to work out. I have to pay my bills. So the question is, at what point are they allowed to halachically, ethically say, I can't do this? I know I agree to do it, but there won't be enough. So there is the Shita of the Tanakam. And the Tanakama says like this, that as long as this field will produce enough grain that you can make a pile into which you can stick a pitchfork and it won't fall down. Don't look inside because we're beginning in middle. As long as the others is working on that field, and whatever the yield will be, it's disappointing. But if it's enough to make a pile that when you put a pitchfork, it doesn't fall down, he cannot quit ethically. Now, by the way, he can always quit. But there's a consequence, and here there won't be a consequence. The problem with the that's a Tanakam. Rabbi Yehuda argues with the Tanakam. I'll tell you why. Rabbi Yehuda says, "Here's a chaim. What are we talking about? There can be an artist working on a field of 6,000 feet, my backyard, or 2 acres, or 50 acres, but it's always the same. That as long as there's enough yield to make a pile that you can put a pitchfork and it's thick enough that it's not going to fall down. No, that's good if the field is little. If the field is much, very big, and you're working 3 months to make that the pile, doesn't make sense to give the same shear. Makes sense. That's what. Rabbi Yehuda, ma kitzva kri. You can't give a one standard, one size fits all, because the whole point is the artist is saying, I'm working too much for too little. You have to speak about how big is the field, and the Tanakama never did that. Oh, hello. So he gave a shear that is relative to the size of the field. Im yesh ba kidei nefilas, the same words. If there will be, with your disappointing yield, enough yield. Kidei nefila, same words. Kidei nefila means is this the standard amount that normally falls. Then you cannot quit. These were the words. Now, what does that mean? And the same Rababo, b'noifala kidei l'zayda. Which is, guys, if I have a base card, like we said already, in a base card, the output is 7.5 cord. The input is 1 cord. Here it means input. If I am working on a base card, normally you would get 7.5. If it's giving at least 1, that means it's giving enough seeds. It's not worth it. But I can replant the whole field with that seeds. And now it's custom made. If I'm working on a field of 1 saw, not a quarter is 30 saw, kidei, to plant 1 saw. It fits. In other words, if it's a lot less than I expected, but at least it's enough seeds that it's giving out enough seeds to replant this field. That's Kedei Nefila. So Kedei Nefila means input. Now the Gemara, let's read this as a kasha. So the same Rababo that is interpreting the words Kedei Nefila in Bava Metzia as input, here he's saying it's output. It's not consistent. Let's read this as a kasha, but it's not a like tiyufta kasha. Maybe just the way to word it, it's not such a tmiya. It's that, even Rababo, forget about the Tana, and Amoida. The same Amoida can read the words Kedei Nefila, can actually say here one thing, and there's something else. And maybe to use Sfara. The Sfara is that leket is not 2%. It's not that. How big of a shlamazel do you have to be the whole time it's slipping out of your hands? On the other hand, when it comes to a worker, it fits over there. By a base code, we're saying the ratio of your, look how disappointing it is. Instead of getting $7,500, you're earning $1,000. Then you still have to stick to your job because there was a risk. You have to own up the risk. But if it's less, there it fits. In other words, input explains it over there, output explains it over here, and yet you can have the same words. That means two different things. Okay, Mishnah, perfect, on top. The Rambam, like always, stands alone in the way he learns this Mishnah. We're not going to learn, and that will have an effect on the whole sugya. But then it's going to be hard to read the Marafulda, the Pnei Moshe. So we're not learning it like all the Rishonim. That's always that way, just to be aware of it. The Rambam will understand even the beginning of the Mishnah, that it's talking about Leket, which would fit, because we began the end of last Perek with Leket. The first Mishnah of Gadish is about Leket. The second part of this Mishnah is about Leket. Problem is that that's going to be Mechadash, a big thing in Leket. We're not going to go there, especially not right now. Maybe we'll mention Shitas Rambam later. But what we will have over here is that the opening of the Mishnah is speaking about Shikha. Now, like we mentioned, the Shikchas Oimer, we're not talking about Shikchas Oimer, we're talking about Shikchas Kama. Shikchas Kama means I have a standing grain field. Now is the time to harvest it. People do that in an organized fashion. So they have rows and they're going down the rows. And this farmer forgot a couple of stalks. He went beyond it. At some point, the Torah says, "Loi sashuv lekachtai." Don't go back to get it. Leave it standing for the poor. That is also shikha. Says the Mishnah. Let's speak about you forgot one ear. You left it standing. Says the Mishnah like this: that if v'roisha magia lekam, if the ear is so tall that if you were to bend it, its tip would touch the remaining standing grain, even though your back is towards it. That means you forgot it. You went beyond it. But if someone were to bend it, the tip would touch what's still to be harvested, and that's not enough. People knew about the first step. Another step. And on top, if it's close enough that when you want to now harvest it, like we mentioned when we began at the end of last Perek, the normal way of harvesting when you're using a sickle, an instrument, is that you're using both of your hands. There are four machines. One hand grabs whatever it is you plan to cut, and the other hand with the instrument does the cutting. So let's say you have standing grain, and you have this one standalone ear that you already walked away from. So says the Mishnah, it's not only that if you were to bend it, the tip of that will touch this. More than that, if you grab the roots, the bottom, are still close enough that when you grab it, that and this will be in your hand. In other words, with one cut, you can still include that standing ear. It's behind you. You might have to bend over. You might have to reach back. It's not halachically called you're going back because it was still somehow theoretically connected with what you are still to harvest. Then Harei Hishabalabayis, not Shikha. That's the way we're learning the Mishnah. Gavaldik. Okay? In other words, it's not enough that the tip can touch. This is the key. But its root has to be close enough. Now, guys, you don't grab it by the root. I don't know where you grab it. In the middle. That you are able to grab that and this together. This is the standing. The one behind is the standalone. You chop it all together. Then, balabais. But the imlav. But if you cannot harvest it together, if it's not niktzadesema, even though that ear can be so tall that if you bend it over, the tip will touch what's still standing. But that's because it's very tall. But if you want to grab what's still standing and that which you forgot, you can't. It's too far away. Then that's shikha. That's the line of shikha. Harei shel aniyah. Okay, guys, this is the way many, not the Rambam, learn the Mishnah. Now, for sure, we're going to Leket. Obviously, the kasha will be, it doesn't make sense. We learned in the previous Mishnah Leket. We're learning in this Mishnah Leket, why would Rabbeinu HaKadosh put in Shikha? Kasha. But that's the way we're going to learn. Now Leket. We began this chapter speaking about the scenario where the Chachamim gave a knas, and the Mishnah concluded in a scenario where there is no knas, in the case of, you have, let's say, even one ear. It's not about the financial amount. It's about the concept. Or maybe a lot. You have one ear of Leket. I have my ears. An ear is the name of a stalk prior to you removing the kernel from it. It's in that phase. What happens if a wind blew them together? What's the problem? The problem is that I know that I had 100 ears, let's say. which are mine, 1 ear of an ani. It's not about the percent. It's never going to be batal. I have to give the leket, I have to leave it for the ani. And if I already took it, I have to give it to an ani. We're not going into to which ani. And when I give to the ani, is free for the ani from maisres. The ani leket is exempt from maisres. So to say to the balabas, I don't know which one is which, just give him 1 ear, it's not enough. Because if I'm the balabas in this case, if I'm going to give the ani an ear that's not his, what I'm giving him has to be tithe. It's not fair for the ani. So says the Mishnah, Shiboilu shaleket, shenes arva bigadish. It got mingled in a whole grain stack. Since the owner cannot discern which ear belongs to the ani, he has to return an ear, 1, or if it was 2, he has to give him 2. Since leket, like we said, is exempt from ma'aser, let's call this the substitute. That's a good word. The substitute the balabas will give, he's giving the ani the same amount, cannot be stam giving it to him. He has to give him that the substitute should already be tied. Ma'aser shiboilas, first he gives trumais and maisres off the shiboilas that he's going to give to the ani, and then the nois loy. So that's rule number 1. The substitute has to be just as good for the ani as the original. How do you make that? How do you do that? The Mishnah doesn't clarify, but Rabbi Eliezer is saying, and I know that we're going to spend a lot of time, not today, later, the Gemara, unpackaging the line of the Mishnah. Let me tell you what Rabbi Eliezer is asking. I know it's going to be difficult to squeeze it into his words. The question is not on the ani. The question is on the owner. How can the owner discharge his obligation? We're speaking about financial, because he's keeping something of the anis by giving a substitute. How does he do that? In other words, if the ani would have gained possession already, if this is the anis, and we want to make an exchange, that's normally the way kinyanim work. You have what's yours, I have what's mine. We make an exchange. So I'm acquiring something from you because you gave it to me. If you never acquired it, the ani never acquired it, it got mixed. So no one gave it to me for me to then give him a substitute. Like, how you can't just do this all unilaterally. More details in the Gemara. It doesn't work that way. Even though it sounds ethical, yeah. One of them belongs to him. No, it has to actually belong to him for him to be able to agree, I'm going to give you my leket, and I'm going to give a substitute, whichever one it is, and I'm going to tithe. Okay. So Rabbi Eliezer is bothered by the fact that the ani, without halachically acquiring it, won't allow me to make a substitute. Remember that rule. So what do? Ella, this is a solution. That mizake esa ani b'chala gadish. The owner, we gave an example that I have a pile of mine, into which the wind blew the anis. What Rabbi Eliezer needs is for the ani to own his. Now, we don't know which one is his. No problem. Let the ani lift up the whole gadish. Now, he doesn't know which one in the gadish is his. The ani will acquire the whole gadish. Then he'll give me back the gadish with the intent, whatever is not his, which is 99%, which is 999%. He gives it back, but that which he acquired, he owns. You get that step? Mizak is ani b'chala gadish. Now, why would the ani give it back to me? The ani has to acquire the whole gadish. Before we go on, let me stop on that. Why do you think that's so? Why is it that if I have a pile, let's say just numbers, I have 100 ears, and then there was an ear of leket that I had separated, and the wind blew it in, now I have 101 ears. No ani acquired it yet. See, that's a problem with leket. It didn't belong, it's for the ani. So Rabbi Eliezer is saying, I cannot halachically effect a substitute before an ani acquired his, and then we'll agree to exchange. Okay. So why doesn't the ani pick up the stack and have in mind the one ear that's in here, I'm acquiring? That will not work. That will not work. That's a very important rule. The rule is, is that when it comes, whether it is a gift, whether it is a sale, when you make a kinyan, it has to be on something specific. Whenever there isn't a davar mesuyam, the kinyan will not be affected. So paskins the Rambam, and this comes from this mission. What's the fact that Rabbi Eliezer doesn't simply allow the ani to pick up the whole pile and to have the kavana, the one, I don't know which one it is. One is in it, I'm acquiring it. It doesn't work. He has to acquire the whole bundle. Now, because a kinyan will not work, when you make a kinyan, you have to know what you are acquiring. It has to be a davar mesuyam. I'll go more than that. You know these sellouts, these stocks. What's it called? No, not stock market. That's already later. When you would go to China and they would have these big factories, they would have default merchandise and they would have these big stocks, closeouts. It's not so simple when it comes to Kenyana. It's not so simple when it comes to Kenyana, halachically, especially when you don't know what the heck you're buying. Especially if you don't even know where it is. Like here, there's a pile. In the pile, one is his. That's stockout is even better. The sellouts, but that was also a strictly problem. Sometimes you say an asmachta, you don't know what you're buying. You didn't know what you're buying. You didn't used to do this business. Some of them made a lot of money. Some of them lost a lot of money. You can lose a lot of money. Your mama should don't know. The seller is also honest. The seller doesn't know. It's not that he's hiding something. Anyway, the point is that the ani will have to acquire all. The balabas doesn't want to give all. The ani can then walk away with it. So you have to act. You have to be ma'oided matan al manas lahachse. Again, I have 100 of mine. The case that I'm giving is one ear blew in. The ani has to acquire his. He doesn't know which one it is. He has to acquire everything. So I tell the ani, I am giving you the 101. It's a gift on the condition that you give back 100.
Theoretically, give him 10% more, and then okay. So
we're going to learn more. God willing, we're going to learn more Monday. Why there's a problem with that. In other words, even though ethically there was one going to an ani, I'm giving one to an ani and I'm tithing it. Not enough. This exchange that I'm making has to be because he already owns it, and now he's agreeing to the exchange. We're going to get back to that one. How does he own it? By making a kinyan. You don't know which one it is. He has to make a kinyan on everything. I'm afraid he's not going to give it back. That's the Pnei Moshe. B'matana manas la'achsev. 3 lines from the Shema Matana. Look inside the Pnei Moshe. The Nimsa. So it comes out that Oisa Shiboilo Shalakit. That one, we don't know which one it is. Mamish ba'al liyad ha'ani. And now it came to the ani, and therefore v'yachal hachlif b'chutz. Okay, that's and by the way, Rabbi Eliezer agrees to the Tanakama. You don't just give him one. Again, it's not fair because his leket would have been Maislis exempt. The one that the Balabasa is giving him, maybe it's leket, but 1%, probably not. So he has to first remove the Maislis for the one that he's giving. He has to give the whole one to the ani, and now Uma'aser Shiboilas Achas, and now V'nois Naloi to for the benefit that the substitute that the ani receives will be for him just as good as the original.
Why isn't the whole amount that you're gifting to the ani have a maser now associated with it?
Because the Torah tells us that leket shikhampeya doesn't have to be tithed, and a gift that I give to an ani has to be tithed.
But I'm saying you're gifting your entire pile on condition.
No, that doesn't matter because it doesn't bother me that he will still have to tithe it because I'm not gifting it to him really for him to keep it. I can, 1 second. I'm allowed to give a gift to the ani and tell him I didn't tithe it.
And then he gives it back.
Not gives it back. Stop. If you're not chayiv to give him something, if you're giving it as your gift, you can give it to an ani, and whatever you give, he should say thank you.
And not tithe it?
Then he'll have to tithe it.
So that's
but if I own leket, I know there was one ear of leket. The leket does not have to be tied. The whole thing of the Sefer of the Mishnah is how do I fix that?
Right. It doesn't sound like you're fixing it to me.
Why not?
Because if there's 100 things of corn and you're gifting 100 to him, he now owes.
And I'm giving him 101.
You're gifting him 101. He now has to theoretically tithe from that.
And if he gives it back to you,
and he gives back,
then you have to tithe.
But the one that he's left still keeps.
The one that is left, 1 second. The one that is left with one was leket. The one that we don't know which one it is. The one that he kept is leket. Leket doesn't have to be tied.
I know, but why?
So now now think about it. He owns one that doesn't have to be tied. You now have 100 that has to be tied.
I'm just talking about the semantics that it turned from a gift to a leket. That's what I was just saying.
No, it's not true. The leket is never a gift. It's different because the leket belongs to a ani. The 100 belongs to the balabais. The balabais gives him the gaddish of 101. So that gift is not bidiyuk the same. He's acquiring the whole bundle with the knowledge that one of them is leket. 100 has to be tied. When he got that gift, it was already that way. One here doesn't have to be tied. The other 100 has to be tied. Then he gives the whole gift back to the balabasa side of the leket. Okay, let's read the Gemara. So now, based on the way we learned the Mishnah, that the Reish of the Mishnah is speaking about Shikha, right? And the Mishnah gave a very clear. If you can bend it and the tip will touch, and when you grab it, you can cut it in one grab. It's not called Shikha yet. So says the Gemara. Now you'll understand a Mishnah that we have in the next chapter, guys, of this Masechta, Perek Vav, Halacha Vav. The Mishnah says the words that there is a comma that's matzil the comma. There's a comma that saves a comma. We don't know what we're talking about. It's this case. When it's ezer comes a comma, which will be words we'll have in the next Mishnah. What does that refer to? Amar Rabbi Yochanan, our Mishnah. Kadod etaninon. Comma means if I have one comma of shikha, shikchas comma. You know what? If not only when you bend it does the tip touch, but if the guy who's going to harvest it he can grab the forgotten one and the uncut ones in one kemitza, and he can cut it together, then it's matzal, meaning it saves it from being shikha. It still belongs to the balabayis. Shiboyla shebakatz. Veroisha magia lakama is saved. Now, Omar Rabbi Yosi, our Mishnah says that if you don't have these two steps, not only does the tip have to touch, Daniel, but you also have to be able to grab it. If you don't have that, it is shikha. Hold on. There is something else. Without it, it will never be shikha. It must be that the surrounding area, surrounding the ear that you forgot, is completely cut. How to define that is very difficult for me. I read different points. In other words, you have a field that you can be going systematically. From one side, everything is harvested, but from the other side, nothing was yet harvested. There, it's never called shikha. Even if you planted things so separated that the tips never touch each other, that you can never grab them together, shikha must mean that the ear that you forgot, all around it is empty. How many inches? I don't know. How many rows? There's different approaches. In other words, when I'm going through a field, if I left something that is not full 360 around it, harvested, it's never going to be called shikha. It will never be called shikha. And in other words, since the cutzit means it's already harvested, there's no standing grain anywhere around it. That is where you say that not only do you need to have roisha magia lakama, not only does the tip of the forgotten one, if you bend it, has to be able to touch the ones that are far away. Not only that, also that if you want to cut it all together, you can grab it all together. But if you don't have katzir soivava, even if you don't have roisha magia lakama, even if you don't have shadei yochayli katzir makama, it will not be shikha. It's going to belong to the balabayis. Now, another thing, says the Mishnah. Let's go to the tip. Guys, you have to chop something. When you have the one ear that you forgot, and the rest that are far away, that you didn't cut yet, if the tip of the forgotten one can touch, let me ask you a question. What happens if the tip of this one can touch, but the standing ones cannot touch?
It's one way.
So one way only. Says the Gemara that what happens if what the Mishnah is being mechadish? You can chop them all together because you have a big hand. However you did it, but the ein hakama The ein hakama In other words, only one way. Doesn't matter. As long as it is one way, it's still not going to be shikha. That's the meaning of nitzoiles. Another scenario. Guys, shikha can be two. What happens if I forgot one? At another point, I forgot another one. And then, so you have, just make one to the right, one to its left, and even further to its left, you have what's still standing. The Mishnah's criteria of you can bend over the tips together. If you want the one that you forgot, you can grab some because it's very tall. You could grab it and cut it together. What happens if that works from the middle one with the standing ring, from the right one with the left one, but to go from the right one all the way to the standing ring, they are already too far apart. That's this case. Hoyeshtayim, you forgot two. And hapnimi is what I call the one to the left, not the outermost one. The middle one, the one that's in between the other shikha and from the other side, the standing ring. Hapnimi is imakama. We're going to go with the vav. The two standalones can be grabbed together. The tips touch each other, they can be grabbed together. The middle one and the comma can be grabbed together. But the outer shikha and the other side comma cannot be cut together. Still, it's not shikha. Hapnimius nitzoilis umatzeles. When the Torah says loy sashuv lekachtoi, it's not called you are returning. It has to be completely out. Now let's apply a concept of shikha, comma, to harvesting frucht alacht. Here we're giving an example of you are harvesting an olive tree. Now, the first step of what you would call shikha is that you finished with this tree. You're walking away from this tree, meaning your back is to the tree. You are walking towards the next tree. You happen to leave on the tree that you turned your back on 1 hour. Also, that in itself is not fully shikha, like we have in our Mishnah. By the grains, it's tipping, cutting. We'll see what it is by the olive tree. Amarab oishiyam or hoishayam. That I want you to know that I was harvesting. Actually, he was treading, but to tread the olives, he was treading olives. He was making olive oil with the great Rabbi. But as they're making olive oil, they're dealing with olives. What do you think a Yid is doing? What are you doing when you're treading olives? Think about a Mishnah. He's thinking about Hilchas olives. So Rabbi Gadol told me, Rabbi Shayo, that before we got to the step, when you're harvesting the olives for us to be the treaders, Kol Zayis, Sha'at Yochel Livsha Yotcha V'Litloi, even if you turn your back to the tree, you finished with this tree in your mind. You're moving on. Your back is towards the tree. If you would stop where you are, you would be able to lean back and to grab the olive or two that you forgot on the original tree. Also, Einoi Shekham. That is what Rabbi Hagadol says. That is what Rabbi Shai is repeating. Says the Gemara, well, not so simple. I disagree with that. I don't have this. If you can, where you are, turning back, not walking back, not working back. You get it? You have to be lifshoit yotcha. You are standing where you are, you can still get it. As long as you pass the tree, let's use the words, your back is towards the tree. Harei zu shikham. Stretching your hand backwards is called returning. Such a deep concept. You know, when should you feel in life? It's too late. I forgot about that. As long as you can, Rabbi Hagadol is saying, as long as you can stretch your hand backwards, that's really not called shikha. That's really true. You know, the truth is, as long as we're living, we can extend our hands. Rabbi Yechanan was a tzaddik. Rabbi Yechanan doesn't need to do tshuva. You understand? Maybe that's that. So he's good. Oh. So, you know what? Yeah, we have time. So the Gemara is saying, our Mishnah appears to argue with Rabbi Hagadol with Rabbi Shia. appears to argue. Why is that? Because our Mishnah says, Shiboilu Shabakatziv Rishon Megiyah L'Kamon. This Shiboilu Shabakatziv. So what the Mishnah says, that it's about the tip reaching, and when you grab it, you can harvest it together. Now, I want you to know that Vishiboilu Shabakatziv Eina Yechaylo Lifshat Yodei V'Litla. If you can bend the tip over and touch it, that means it's close enough for you to extend your hand and to do that. Why did the Mishnah have to give the other criteria that you have to be able to grab it together? If Rabbi Shaya would have been correct when it comes to the olive trees, comes to the olives, all you need there is to be able to extend your hand to pick it, then our Mishnah's insistence that you have to be able to grab it to cut it together should not have been needed. It's too much demanded in our Mishnah. It should have been enough as long as the tips can touch each other. That would have been, in the Gemara's Kasha, similar to your hand extending backwards. Kasha answers the Gemara, Daf Mem Daled, that Rabbi Ilah, which is Rabbi Ilah, B'Shem Rabbi Shaya, that no, that our Mishnah, Ba'uman Hasheni Shanu. In other words, makes a big difference when it comes to Shikha. Before you think about turning backwards, stretching your hand, touching the tips, grabbing it together, is what you forgot on the same row, on the same planted row, or is it already on another standing row? If it's on the standing row, which is the case of Rabbi Shaya, since the next olive tree is on the same row, it's enough that all you need to do is if you can extend your hand backwards and you get it, it's not shikha. You don't need more than that. Our Mishnah, speaking about the standing ear, is on a different row, which makes it worse. It's not enough that the tips touch each other, which is take equal to reaching backwards. You also have to be able to grab it in your hand and to take it together. We'll stop over here. God willing, to be continued.